Alexandra, thank you for being here today. Would you please take a moment to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here. My name is Alexandra Horowitz, and I am the founder and executive producer of a small media content producer called Voices, Storytelling, and Media. I started it during the pandemic. My background is as an independent filmmaker and a television news producer.
Excellent. And I'm really looking forward to having this conversation with you. The series we're doing this interview for is the Archives and Audiences. And part of what the Committee on Public Awareness is so interested in is how archives are actually used, how archivists help participate, and between the archivists and collections, how they can be used in new creative ways, even if they're not new ways, like non-traditional academic ways. So I'm really looking forward to hearing your answers. And my first question for you is, you've researched, written, and filmed and produced media using oral histories and archival materials. So can you tell us a little bit more about your process and what goes into creating those works?
Absolutely, I'd be happy to. And I just want to say, in terms of using archives in creative ways, I love that. I mean, that's what I do, and that's what I'm trying to do with Voices, Storytelling, and Media, is look at different ways that archives can be used creatively, whether it's podcasts or digital exhibits or film, audio, educational materials. I just think there's so much potential out there. What I have done until this point has been using archives for film, and I have based them on oral histories. Um, Sometimes on one oral history where we're profiling a person, either for an event where the person is doing a public program, for example, and going through the person's oral history and taking this hour and a half or 2 hour oral history and finding, sort of a 5 minute story in there that is relevant to whatever the story is you're trying to tell, right? If it's an exhibit, what is the exhibit trying to say? If it's a public program, what is the purpose of the person being here? Just to pull out from that long oral history the sort of the core story that is relevant to the event or the exhibit. And so that is one way, by profiling one person. The other way I've done it is to take an oral history, a collection of oral histories, and find one theme through that collection. So I did a film called Reawakening, which was about the Charlottesville Jewish community's response to the Unite the Right rallies in August of 2017. And the oral history was not about the Unite the Right rallies. It was just a profile of the Jewish community of Charlottesville. So each person, and I used about 8 or 10 oral histories, each person had an oral history of about an hour and a half to 2 hours talking about their whole background, their Jewish upbringing, and what brought them to Charlottesville, and how they practiced, and their involvement with the Jewish community, and what they did professionally. I mean, it had 99.5% of each interview had nothing to do with the Unite the Right rallies, but because the Unite the Right rallies happened, everybody spoke about it in the interview. And so I was able, working with the professor who conducted the oral history, I was able to pull out sound bites from each person and put them together in a film that looked at the response of the community to this event. So I guess that's the first point I want to make, is that the oral history don't have to be about the specific theme that you want in the final product, right? So with both of those ways of doing it, either with looking at one oral history in depth or looking at a theme through a collection, after that, the process is kind of the same. Like I go through, I listen to them, I go through the transcripts, I find the most powerful sound bites, the ones that really speak to the subject and are heartfelt and compelling. And I literally just take a highlighter and highlight all of those. And then I put them together. I look at what I have in my yellow highlights and I put them together in a story form. Like, what story are all of these individual sound bites telling, and what kind of narrative arc can you develop from them? And there usually is one, thankfully. And after that, and I don't write any narration. I mean, I really want the work I do to be, I call my company Voices. It's meant to be the voices of the people in the oral histories. It's not meant to be, my voice kind of linking everything they have to say. And then I go through, and once I have the script developed from the sound bites, I look for visual archival material, mostly photographs, sometimes video, sometimes newspaper or other printed material that can be used to illustrate what they're talking about. And sometimes that comes from libraries and collections. Sometimes it comes from the people themselves or other organizations that have been involved in whatever the subject matter is. So that is largely the process. And it's a very fulfilling one.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Your approach and your use of the oral histories and of archival materials in general um, indicates to me, at least, it's like you knew that these were available, and knowing that archives and archivists can sometimes have a hard time getting the messaging out that, hey, we're here, please use us. I'm wondering what in your background or experiences first introduced you to oral histories and or archives.
So I will say, kind of being thrown into the fire. I had worked, most of my career, I worked for CNN. And and I had no experience with archives. I was doing daily news, and when you're on deadline and you need video, at least, I worked there a while ago, but at least at the time I worked there, what you did when you needed video that you weren't going out and shooting was you called the library and you said, what do we have? And they made it available to you, and then you used it. So that was my entire experience. I had I just didn't think about archives. I had to do a shoot once at the National Archives, but that was, I don't even remember the story it wasn't relevant to using archives. So then, okay, flash forward many years. I took some time off, stayed home with my kids. I started up again as an independent producer, and I produced the film that is linked to this. It's Marian Ingram. It's a profile of a woman who is a Holocaust survivor who came to the US in the 1950s and then worked in the civil rights movement. And I had this great oral history, and I had the script, and I needed pictures. And I thought, okay, I also had a deadline. Where am I going to get these pictures? And I had no idea. There was no library to call. I was kind of at a loss as to what to do. And I started Googling, and I started hunting around, and I went to the Library of Congress website. There's so much online. I don't know what people did before collections were really online, but now you can sit at home, as we all have been doing for a long period of time, and have access to enormous resources around the country and around the world. So I just started Googling, and I found material in large archives like the Library of Congress, and I found material in smaller towns, in libraries and universities. And it was, to me personally, it was just this amazing discovery that there's so much out there that can be utilized that's just amazing and I wish more people knew about.
Thank you so much for that answer. I think it's very helpful for us as archivists to hear how people found us, because it usually is, it starts with a Google search or
Yeah.
asking that question of like, this should exist. Where would it live?
Right. And it was largely entirely a Google search, but now, now that I'm not so new to it, I feel like there's a whole network of people, and there's probably a listserv where I could say, I need this. Does anyone have it? And could I use it?
Thank you so much. That was a great answer and very informative for us too. Circling back to the archival materials for your work, you touched on this a little bit, but just in case you had more to share, we're curious about how you choose the videos and archival materials that you incorporate into your work.
I think it starts with the stories that organizations want to tell, right? Is there an exhibit? Is there an event? Is there a film that's being made for a classroom? And then I think in terms of the oral histories, the sound bites, it's what is going to tell the story the most powerfully. So not just the content. I mean, sometimes you just need a soundbite that says X because you have to get from point A to point B, and it doesn't make any sense if there's not something that connects it. But really, what I look for is those that have the most heart, like what is going to make people really feel and see another person's story or another person's point of view. Much of the way that we have told history is now being revisited. Voices are being included that have not previously been featured so prominently. And I am sure that there is just a wealth of archival material that can be used to tell those stories and to help organizations that are revisiting their narratives and trying to add dimensions to race and gender, for example, that there has to be a wealth of material out there that can be used for that.
Could you share like either one of your most favorite archival finds or like a fond memory you have working in the archives?
Um, so my favorite find is something that I thought I wasn't going to be able to use. And it was when I was doing this video of Marion Ingram, and she had volunteered and did some organizing for the March on Washington. And hunting around, I found this film that USIA had produced in the 1960s afterwards. And it had the MLK speech but it also had people arriving, and it had buses, and it crowds and tents, and it was just a godsend. And then I tried to get permission to use it, and it seemed like a really complicated process, and I had a deadline, and I didn't think I was going to get it in time. So I put the paperwork in and went through the channels, but then I forgot about it really because I didn't think I was ever going to get to use it. And then 2 days before I was set to edit, I got an email out of the blue that said, yes, of course you can use it. The only thing you can't use is the Martin Luther King sections because that's protected by his estate. But anything else is fair game. So, it's in the public domain, so you can use it. And it was just sort of this waterfall of riches to be able to use it. So.
That is a great story. I'm so glad to hear that. When you've been working with archival materials and within archives and with archivists, are there some examples of how the archives and those materials have helped to inspire and inform your work?
Yeah, I think it's encouraged me to want to do more with archives. Um, because I think history is so important. And I just think I love history. I hated history in school. I took as little of it as possible. But the parts of history that are really sort of rich, and I think that can teach the most powerfully, are photographs, are hearing people's stories. Yes, it's not a collection of facts, and sometimes and it's remembered with a point of view that sometimes is the one you want to teach and sometimes maybe isn't, but it's heartfelt and it's powerful, and it's, the human experience. And so I think that all of that is there in the archives in the way that it's not usually in the history books. And so I just find that really encouraging. And the more those archives are able to be accessed and used, I think the more creatively we can teach um, and connect to people, whether it's in museums, whether it's in film, whether it's in education, in classrooms, that there's that connection through archives that there isn't in other ways.
I love the word you chose to describe that as connection. I think that is a, a powerful and but yet simplistic in its most awesome form in terms of as archivists trying to have materials be used and connect with communities to make sure that they are represented. I mean, so many ways that we could have more meaningful connections.
Yeah, and I think that the more archives, I mean, I've always done it, from the producer end where I'm looking. I don't know what archivists do proactively, but I would say that the more that you can look around in your community about what's going on in classrooms and museums and public events, and see if the resources that you have, I think a lot of times people in the communities just aren't aware of these repositories of material that that could be being used by the community. So maybe it's up to the archives and archivists to try to connect with those people, or at least make known that the resources are available.
Yes, I think that is definitely as the field, which I can't speak for everybody, but my observation and experience has been this has very much been a perpetual issue for us in how to one not only message value of collections, but to
Mhm.
make sure we're actually connecting with the community in the way the community wants to be connected with. So
Right.
it's definitely something I think is fair to say many of us are aware of, and we are a very awkward work in progress towards
Yeah.
making those better connections. But yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with that one.
Yeah. Um,
Oh,
I,
sorry.
I think photos in particular, I've gone sometimes to the Library of Congress website just to look at photos if I needed them on a certain theme. And a photo can just say so much. One photo that can speak volumes about whatever the subject matter is. And yeah, so I just think for people in your communities to know what resources you have available um, is a really powerful thing.
Speaking of resources in use, is there an item or an area of a collection that you would like to use but like haven't been able to find?
Um, I know you have connections. I not at the moment, but I am so glad now to be in touch with this network of people that I certainly will turn to it in the future as needed when things come up.
Yes, please do. We are we are here and available, so we welcome
That's
that.
great. That's great.
So, thinking about access to archives, and I know with COVID-19, obviously all of our realities have gotten a little bit more challenging.
Yeah.
But thinking about your past work, have there been any sort of barriers to access or any challenges specific to trying to reach archives or use the collections?
Um, for the most part, no. I try to use, I mean, in the past, I've tried to use material that's in the public domain. Um, and the times that I have had to get permission, it hasn't been difficult. In fact, my experience has been more that um, professionals want their collections used and are very helpful in helping you use them. I had in the film that I've linked, there is there's a visual of a burning cross towards the end of it, and it, I just all of a sudden realized I needed a burning cross, and I Googled it and I found these resources, but I needed it soon. And so there were all these pictures online. So I picked one, and it was from East Carolina University. And I emailed the person there, and he was very nice and very accommodating. And within, I said, well, what do I need to do to have permission to use this? Can I use it? And, is there a fee? And how do can I get a digital copy on all of this? And I think within an hour, maybe or two, I had permission. I had the digital copy of the film, of the photo, and he couldn't have been nicer. And that has generally been my experience, um, is that people are, and especially I think I do, I generally work with nonprofits. And so if people know it's for a community event, I use some news footage. I know it's not, I guess it's archival news footage. It wasn't that old, but for Charlottesville. And I went to the local television stations, and at first they were like, okay, it's this many $1,000 a minute of footage that you want. And I said, but it's for, an exhibit at the local historical society. And they're like, oh, okay, well, if it's for that, we'll send you our reel. So I think that when people know it's, you're not trying to sell it, you're not trying to put it on your Facebook page, or, it's a community, it's for public history, then uh, I've generally found people to be very helpful and accommodating.
I am very glad to hear that. That used to not be the case way back in the day. So I'm very
Mhm.
glad that's been your experience. What's the one thing you wish the general public knew about archives?
I think I wish that the public just knew how much was there, um, and what an enormous resource it is. I've got to think for teachers, for writers, for obviously for any kind of researcher, but I think people don't necessarily know. Like I even working in media for more than a decade, I didn't have any idea. So I think just for people to know what's there and how much is contained in them. In one oral history, you find things sometimes like a little piece of an interview that has nothing to do with the bigger picture, but it is sometimes the most valuable piece of that whole. So just for people to realize what's out there, that we don't normally see, but that if you go looking, you might have to look a lot, but maybe with the help of an archivist, um, that is there.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that answer. I think that that was such a great way to put it for us in terms of like that it is something to focus on, making sure that people know one, that we exist, and two, just how much is there and that we want you to use it kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Excellent. Circling back to your work and the projects that you have done, what has been some of the feedback you've received and general reception, that kind of thing?
So generally good. But the one thing that has been consistent is that people are always surprised that you can pull a storyline, like a 5 minute, you can make a 5 minute film out of, an hour and a half, 2 hour, 2.5 hour oral history, or out of a collection that's, 15 hours of oral history, 20 hours of oral history, that you can pull, you can, say, I'm going to do this theme, or and that you can pull a tight knit, powerful story, compelling story out of that. I think people in my experience tend to think, oh yeah, there's an oral history on X, and so it's going to be everything about X. But when you look for that one specific theme or that one specific subject, that you can pull a really compelling story that maybe has to do with the greater whole and maybe doesn't, but people are always surprised, in my experience, to see that, it's like pulling a rabbit out of a hat.
And speaking of your work and of yourself, where can people find you online and connect with you?
So my website is voicesstorytelling.com. And that has my email address on it. It's got my portfolio on it. It's got my email address on it and more about my work on it. So it's Voices Storytelling, VoicesStoryTelling.com.
Thank you for spelling that out. And we will
Yeah, I hope I
definitely,
spelled it right.
I tracked, I think
Yeah.
so. You
I
didn't know
wasn't
it was my,
expecting it to be that hard to spell. It's not hard to spell when I type it. But anyway, it's voicesstorytelling.com, and the company is Voices Storytelling and Media.
is there anything else you'd like to share with us or anything I didn't ask that you would like to
Um,
answer?
I would just say I'm happy to be a resource or a consultant with, if people have archival material that they're thinking of using, I'm happy to talk to anybody, not for any fee or anything, but just to a brainstorming session, or if somebody doesn't have ideas but has this collection and wants to talk about how could they use it. I'm always happy to brainstorm or do informal consulting, to help give some shape and guidance. If that's helpful to anyone, please feel free to reach out.
Thank you so much for that offer. I imagine that would be particularly helpful. And I'm mentioning this for people listening, not so much yourself,
Mhm.
but bringing in grants or seeking donor funding, sometimes connecting with an expert like yourself, and even just getting like a one page, here's what Alexandra would do if we get the money
Right, right.
proposal. Like,
No, I'm absolutely happy to help with that. I have written
mhm.
grants myself. I've received grants myself. And I am happy to give some shape and form to what you could do with your archives, if that's helpful in anyone's grant proposal writing.
Absolutely, yes. So people who are watching slash reading, definitely take Alexandra up on this
Yeah.
offer. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Alexandra. Is there anything else before I formally close our interview?
Um, no, I am really think very highly of archivists and archives and all that you do to preserve our history. And um, I, would like to get those voices and get those materials out there. And so um, that that's it. I mean, please feel free to call and brainstorm, or anytime. I'm happy to do it. And I'm so happy to be here today and to have found this connection.